If you want to lose fat, don't eat carbs. If you eat carbs, you're gonna gain weight. Don't eat carbs at night. What's the truth of it? Hello fam, and welcome to my channel. My name's Melissa Neal, and this channel is all about helping you if you're a woman over 40 or like me, over 50, get in fantastic shape. And I was on one of my masterclasses recently and we were talking about carbohydrates, and it made me think, wow, there is so much information out there, isn't there? And it's really confusing about what to do about eating carbohydrates and whether to go low carb, whether to go keto, whether to carb cycle. So I'm gonna make this video completely about carbohydrates. So the first thing to say is carbs get demonized, don't they? Carbohydrates, so that's things like rice, pasta, potatoes, sweet potatoes, bread even, they all get demonized. And what's happened is the ketogenic diet, where you eat very low carbohydrates, has got extremely popular. And what I would say is the ketogenic diet actually works for weight loss, because what you find when you drop your carbohydrates in that really extreme way is you are going to experience weight loss. Although I've had a number of clients when they come to me who that isn't actually working anymore, but when you first start it, at least it actually works. So you hop on the scale and you're like, wow, I'm losing all this weight. But the problem with it is you're not just losing body fat, you're actually losing muscle mass, and you're actually losing water at the same time. So all that weight that you see drop on the scale, it's not all body fat. So what you're doing when you're doing a ketogenic or very low carb diet is you're actually compromising, because what's going to happen is you're going to lose muscle mass at the same time, and that is a massive problem for women over 40, because we actually need muscle. Muscle burns fat, muscle burns calories, and we are actually already losing muscle mass at a rate of 1% per year. And that's part of the reason why we lose our metabolism. So if you go on a ketogenic diet, you're going to lose even more muscle mass than you've got, and you can't afford to lose it, because that's what's actually helping you with your metabolism. And the other problem with not eating what I would call enough carbohydrates is it's gonna be really difficult to put on muscle. So one of the things that I recommend is strength training, but as well as protein being a big component of that, carbohydrates impact on not only how heavy you can lift, but the intensity of your workout. So with carbohydrates in your system, you can actually work more intensely and you can lift heavier. So if you're not eating carbohydrates, or you're eating very low carbohydrates, it's actually going to affect your body's ability to build muscle. Another problem with very low carbohydrate diets is that they're really difficult to stick to in the long term. I always say that when you're embarking on any kind of diet, any way of eating, what you've got to think about is this sustainable? Can you do it over the long term? And for a lot of people, a very low carbohydrate or a ketogenic style of diet, they're not going to be able to sustain it. Can you imagine? You're never going to eat bread, you're never going to eat pasta, you're never going to eat rice or potatoes, all those things, any kind of grains. That's going to be really hard to stick to in the long term. So what happens to people is they have this rapid weight loss with ketogenic diets, and then it just all comes back on again when they start eating normally. For quite a lot of those people, they actually gain more weight than what they started with. If you can do a ketogenic diet and stick to it for the rest of your life, then that is absolutely fine, but you're still going to find it hard to put on muscle. But if you can't stick to it, it's not a good idea to even start. I'm not suggesting that women over 40 eat a high carbohydrate diet. What I'm talking about is a moderate amount of carbs. So in this video, I'm now going to go into a complete guide to carbohydrates and how to put carbohydrates into your diet so that you can experience fat loss, and we're talking about fat loss, not weight loss, and there's a big difference. Before I take you through a step-by-step guide to how to incorporate carbohydrates for fat loss, I'm just going to tell you about my free nutrition guide. So it's going to give you a lot more detailed information about carbohydrates, about protein, about fats, about calories. So I'm going to link that up here. And do remember, I actually run my own programs for women over 40. Those are exercise and weight loss programs, and they also include nutrition and meal plans in those programs. So if you're finding all of this kind of really difficult, either download my free nutrition guide or go to my website and actually join one of my programs. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how much carbohydrate to take in. So what I'm talking about is a moderate amount of carbohydrates. I'm not talking about very low carbohydrates. I'm not talking about a high carbohydrate diet. What we're talking about, if we're thinking of it as macronutrients, it's gonna be about 30 to 40% of your total calorie needs are coming from carbohydrates. And that's gonna be usually for most women anywhere between 100 grams and 200 grams of carbohydrates. That's how it works. It's moderate. And if you want more information about how to calculate your total macros and calories, I've made a video, I'm going to link it up here, which is how to calculate your calories and macros. So do take a look at that. Now, one of the things that's really misunderstood is for women that have got type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, or maybe your insulin resistance. And in fact, insulin resistance in women over 40 is really common. You can almost kind of assume that you have got insulin resistance when you reach this age. There is a figure going around that around 80% of Americans are walking around with insulin resistance. And if you want to find out more about that, check out a book by Benjamin Bickman called Why We Get Sick. It's a whole book on insulin resistance. But what people think is if they're diabetic or pre-diabetic that they can't eat carbohydrates, and that is actually not the case. And I'm going to take you through in this video some examples of carbohydrates that you can eat, examples of carbohydrates that if you're pre-diabetes or diabetic, they're best to sort of cut out altogether, and for other people they're better to keep to a minimum. So I got some examples of carbohydrates that are good to eat, and the first thing to say is, going back to that point about insulin resistance and avoiding a huge blood sugar spike, it's always good if you eat your carbohydrates with protein, because that's going to avoid a blood sugar spike. Protein is also a really key thing for women over 40. So the kind of carbohydrates that I would recommend you eat are a range of stuff. I've got a few examples here, but things like sweet potato. That is absolutely fantastic. It's low GI, it's really satisfying, and it's really healthy for you. Don't fear white potatoes. I've got new potatoes here. You can see that here, they've got the skin on. So they're a bit lower in the glycemic index than standard potatoes. And the thing to remember with white potatoes or sweet potatoes is you bake or boil them or do them in the air fryer. Just don't fry them, because that's not so healthy for you. Another really great ingredient that I absolutely love is oatmeal. Oatmeal comes in so many different forms. You might want jumbo oats, uncut oats, or cut oats. Just go for the whole oats rather than some of that really commercial powder stuff that's a bit more processed, because again, that's going to give you a bigger sort of blood sugar spike. I absolutely love oatmeal for breakfast. You can make them into savoury dishes or sweet dishes. It keeps you full and satisfied for a really long time time. So that's the beauty of it. If you're gluten intolerant, just go for gluten-free oatmeal. Another key ingredient that lots of people love is rice. I've got black rice there. That's really good for you. I love it because it's got a really nutty flavour. There's brown rice. If you're going to go for white rice, go for basmati rice. That's what I've got there, and that is a bit lower on the glycemic index than standard white rice. Some people would say, well, don't eat white rice, but the thing is, if you don't like black or brown rice, then that's the only alternative, isn't it? So just go for basmati rice. The other thing that's really great that you might be familiar with as a protein source, but they actually have carbohydrates in them, are beans. I've got chickpeas there, and lentils. What's really great about those is they've already got protein in them as well. So if you eat them, you don't have to add protein necessarily to them, and they're really economical, they're satisfying, and again, they're going to just keep you full for a long time. They've got lots of fibre. This is a type of pasta. It's like a bean or a lentil, so it's going to have carbohydrate in it and it's going to have protein. So it's kind of pasta that's high in protein, but it's not going to give you a huge insulin spike. Don't forget veggies. These are carrots, but squashes, pumpkins, that sort of thing, they actually have carbohydrates in them as well. I'm going to talk about some of the carbohydrates to use with caution, and then some of the ones to avoid. I absolutely love bananas. If you've got type 2 diabetes, it might be better to avoid them, or if you're going to have them, make sure you combine them with protein. If you actually have them green, they're not going to give you such a blood sugar spike. These ones are very, very ripe. You can see they're almost going black there. I eat them, but I'm not pre-diabetes or with type 2 diabetes, but I generally always eat them with protein. Those are with caution, and the same with here. This is plantain, the same kind of thing. Fruit has carbohydrate in. Again, if you're trying to watch what you eat and lose weight, eat fruit, yes, but keep them to sort of 2 or 3 portions a day, something like that. Not a massive amount of fruit. Now, the things that I would give a wide berth if you're trying to lose body fat is anything with white flour. So that's going to be your white bread, white pasta. This is something I really never eat, and it's here for my kids. And the absolute thing to avoid, if at all possible, is sugar, of course. Doesn't matter whether it's white sugar or brown sugar. If you're not diabetic or pre-diabetes, just have them occasionally. You know, that's what I do. I don't have it all the time. And if you've got type 2 diabetes, you really need to cut them out of your diet altogether. When should you eat carbohydrates? Well, the first thing to say is more carbohydrate on the days that you're strength training. And when you are strength training, and this is like a massive game changer that I learned that really helped me transform my body, actually eat your carbohydrates before and after strength training. Always have a pre-workout snack that has some sort of carbohydrate in it and some protein, so that you're actually fueling your body correctly to get the maximum performance in the gym or your home gym. And then once you've worked out, preferably within an hour, actually have some more protein and carbohydrate, because that's going to replenish your glycogen stores in your muscle, and it's going to help with muscle recovery. And you're also going to burn those carbohydrates much more effectively when you've just worked out. For the rest of the day, you can taper your carbohydrates down. So for my evening meal, I actually have a very low carbohydrate meal normally when I'm in a fat loss phase, and a small amount of carbohydrates at lunchtime. So I kind of slowly taper it down. Really focus your carbohydrates around the days that you train and your training schedule, what time of day you actually do your strength training. And that's really known as something called carb cycling, when you eat more carbohydrates on the day that you do strength training, and that's really effective. I would love to reassure you that I got stage lean at every single one of my competitions by eating carbohydrates, and I eat carbohydrates now. I'm not stage lean, but certainly I'm slim. It has helped me build and retain muscle, and I could do with all the help I can get, because when you reach over 40, or when you're like me over 50, and I'm actually in my late 50s now, it gets much harder and harder to build muscle. So the only tool you've got in your armory really is nutrition to help you do that. That's what I do. Protein is also really key, and as I said, I've made a whole video about that.